a 2-hour spot, I couldn't do it without Ross.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he's one of the wilds.
Indeed.
In the Wild Wild West.
On July 3rd, 1981, Ross Martin paid the ultimate price for disobeying his doctor's warnings and his wife's pleadings to quit. Hollywood remained mum for 4 decades on the true cause of death for television's most legendary master of disguise. The tragic reality behind the Wild Wild West star's last minutes on that tennis court has now been exposed in disturbing medical documents. Not even Robert Conrad, his best friend, could spare him, and the recording company that made a killing off of him skipped his burial. In Grodek, Poland, on March 22, 1920, Martin Rosenblatt was born Ross Martin. His father, Isaac Rosenblatt, was a tinsmith, and his mother, Sarah Lerner, was a housewife. They were members of the Polish Jewish community residing in an unknown area following World War I. Their family, like many others in Eastern Europe, was subject to rising anti-Semitism and instability. Leaving everything behind and starting over in America was a difficult decision, but they desired a safer life. Grodek was a part of Poland when Martin was born, but it became part of Ukraine after World War II due to shifting boundaries. Because of the dynamic nature of the area, every aspect of his existence was uncertain. Even his name would evolve as time went on. After relocating to the United States, Martin Rosenblatt changed his name to Ross Martin. Even as a newborn, he set off on his voyage across the ocean. On August 29, 1920, at Danzig, he and his family got on the vessel New Rel. On September 18th, after nearly 3 weeks at sea, they reached Ellis Island. His name was registered as Marcus Rosenblatt by immigration officials, a minor modification that frequently occurred throughout the paperwork procedure. In their quest for a new beginning, millions of immigrants passed through Ellis Island. As was the case for the majority, the Rosenblatt family rode in steerage. Prior to entering the United States, they were subject to rigorous medical and legal screenings. They moved to the Bronx, an area teeming with immigrants attempting to start over when they were cleared. Even before he mastered English, Ross Martin became proficient in a number of languages while growing up in this globe. He was fluent in Russian, Polish, and Yiddish at home, and subsequently learned French, Spanish, and Italian. Among his many talents, his command of many languages served him well in his acting career, particularly in his portrayal as Artemus Gordon in the Wild Wild West. He brought a unique dimension to his performances by even using Russian in a few situations. Martin thrived academically despite the hardships of his working-class immigrant family. The elite City College of New York, where he studied, is well known for its large number of first-generation students. With a magna cum laude degree, he established himself as a top student in his class. Following that, he attended the National University School of Law at George Washington University and graduated with a Juris Doctor degree. He was dissatisfied with the trajectory his life was taking, which appeared to go toward a secure profession in either law or business. Acting was his career path of choice, not becoming a lawyer. He and Bernie West were a comedic pair that formed in the 1940s. They were known as Ross and West. Upstate New York was no match for their fast-paced, physically comic performances in vaudeville and nightclubs. They were well received by the crowds and had impeccable timing. West went on to describe Martin as a comedy genius, praising his innate talent for getting people to laugh. The partnership didn't last long, though, because West went into writing and producing, and Martin wanted to pursue other prospects in the entertainment industry. Martin had already gone on to greater things when West would eventually work on sitcoms like All in the Family. His Broadway debut was in 1953. The 1937 film Nothing Sacred served as the inspiration for his debut feature, the musical parody Hazel Flag. At the Mark Hellinger Theater, he was Dr. Egelhofer for 190 performances. A hit with audiences, the musical included music by Jules Stein and words by Bob Hillard. While performing alongside Thomas Mitchell and Helen Gallagher, Martin was notable for his command of the stage and his skill at blending comedy and drama. He established himself as more than simply a comic. He was able to get into the radio industry after his breakthrough on Broadway. With his remarkable talent for voice acting, which he honed in the late 1940s and early 1950s on radio shows like Dimension X and The Cavalcade of America, Ross Martin became a household name and eventually hosted his own show, The Ross Martin Show. In every episode, his multi-role acting chops were on full display. At times, the audience didn't even notice he was the same guy speaking different voices. Because of his adaptability, he became a popular voice actor and eventually found success in live TV anthologies. After that, Hollywood started phoning. He first appeared on screen in 1955's Conquest of Space, a science fiction epic directed by George Pal about the first human expedition to Mars. A supporting part in a film with innovative visual effects and profound existential issues, he portrayed Sergeant Andrei Fodor. Although the picture failed to get much attention, it marked a significant milestone for Martin. The Colossus of New York, another science fiction thriller, featured him a few years down the road. His career in Hollywood was taking off by 1958, and it would continue for over 3 decades. In 1959, Ross Martin received his big break playing the role of Andamo on Blake Edwards' CBS comedy, Mr. Lucky. In addition to being John Vivian's smooth-talking gambler's sidekick, the quick-witted Andamo served as a gunrunner. There was an air of adventure and peril because the show took place aboard a floating casino. The instant Andamo saw Martin's caustic wit, he stood out. As the police discovered a stash of guns on Lucky's boat, his smuggling enterprise took a negative turn in the premiere episode. He established the tone for his character's cutting wit with his deadpan delivery. "We are in trouble. I am the one responsible for the gun smuggling." In his off-screen life, Martin gave the part his own unique spin by improvising lines and coming up with his own disguises. He spied a mobster in one episode while disguised as a bartender. Additionally, he was skilled at creating his own cosmetics, which would play a significant role in his professional trajectory. Despite high accolades for the show's style and humor, it was canceled after only 1 season due to low ratings. Nonetheless, naysayers paid attention. In a glowing review, TV Guide gushed over Martin's effortlessly charming performance, praising his versatility as an actor. Even more crucially, Mr. Lucky connected him with Blake Edwards, a filmmaker who would have a significant impact on his career down the road. Experiment in Terror, 1962, which Martin performed 3 years later, horrified audiences. He portrayed the psychopath Garland Red Lynch, who terrorizes Lee Remick's character, bank teller Kelly Sherwood, due to his asthma. It was very different from the enchanting Andamo. Martin perfected Lynch's creepy, laborious breathing by studying an asthmatic childhood buddy. Also, he was adamant on performing all of his own stunts, including a nasty one-take garage assault. The end outcome was horrifying. As Lynch chokes her co-worker, his breathing becoming heavier by the second, Sherwood is made to listen over the phone in a terrifying scene. Some critics drew parallels to Anthony Perkins's portrayal of Norman Bates in the film Psycho. Lynch was hailed by the New York Times as a masterclass in understated menace. Director David Lynch, who had no relation to Martin, subsequently claimed that the role served as inspiration for Twin Peaks killer Bob. Martin received an unusual nomination for a thriller villain, a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of the part. Fearing he would be typecast, he nearly declined the role, but ultimately, it was a career-defining performance. Martin demonstrated his ability to create villains that were both hilarious and scary in 1965's The Great Race. He portrayed the plotting nobleman Baron Rolf von Stupa in the made-up Kingdom of Carpia. Although Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon were also in the Blake Edwards-directed picture, Martin was the star of every scene he was in. A battle between his character and Leslie, played by Curtis, is one of the finest moments in the film. The Baron smirked and said, "I prefer a man's weapon. How are you with a saber?" before starting an elaborate but pointless sword battle. Martin had impeccable comedic timing. He even improvised during the infamous 10-minute pie battle, a chaotic spectacle involving more than 4,000 pies. After the fact, he cracked the quip, "I've never been so deliciously humiliated." He was a huge hit with critics, who praised his deliciously suave performance and said he effortlessly stole the show. It established Martin as an actor capable of competing with Hollywood's A-listers and had a record-breaking $12 million budget for a comedy at the time. Martin demonstrated his mettle from 1959 until 1965. He was charming and cunning in his roles as Andamo and Garland Lynch, and he was hilarious and villainous in his portrayal as Baron von Stupa. Rare was his ability to switch gears between terror and humor. He said that his analytical approach to acting came from his background as a lawyer and his bilingual upbringing. His talents extended well beyond the realm of performing. He had been developing characters for quite some time, beginning with his time in Mr. Lucky. Robert Ross was one of Hollywood's most distinctive performers because, as Blake Edwards put it, Ross could make you laugh, then terrify you sometimes in the same scene. His ability to play many characters at once was his magic. Ross Martin revolutionized the role of the television sidekick. From 1965 until 1969, he portrayed Artemus Gordon on The Wild Wild West. More than just James West's sidekick, he was a master of espionage, a wizard with devices, and one of the greatest disguise artists television had ever witnessed. Even his co-star Robert Conrad frequently failed to identify him until the cameras started rolling because of how realistic his makeovers were. The majority of Martin's disguises were creations by him. He would create elaborate looks in his dressing room by assembling wigs, prosthetics, and elaborate outfits. It was always a mystery to the staff. He portrayed a stooped gravedigger with a latex hump and decaying teeth in 1967's Night of the Vicious Valentine. Some members of the team thought he was a background actor because of how unusual he appeared. He was so good at playing several roles that he altered not only his appearance but also his speech, gait, and mannerisms. His accent-switching skills were second to none. He was fluent in 8 languages: Polish, Yiddish, Russian, French, Spanish, Italian, German, and English. With the addition of a waxed mustache and an exaggerated Parisian lilt, he transformed into a flashy French magician in Night of the Raven, 1966. After the fact, Ken Chase, who did the makeup for the program, said that Martin was better at transformations than the majority of Hollywood's effects teams. In the course of his lunch breaks, Martin would doodle on napkins ideas for disguises, which he would later implement. He felt the physical strain of the position as well. He had to apply full-body burn makeup for 12 hours for his 1968 role as a maimed arsonist in Night of the Returning Dead. Despite his skin being severely irritated by the latex, he persisted in filming. His commitment brought to mind the legendary silent cinema actor Lon Chaney Sr., sometimes referred to as the Man of 1,000 Faces. The 1967 film Night of the Casual Killer featured one of his most shocking abilities. In a nail-biting covert moment, he stringed out Chan's nocturne in an effort significant. Martin was a concert-trained violinist who had studied at Juilliard in the 1940s, so it wasn't an act. Martin played live on set throughout the scene's filming, which only required one take. Everyone on board, including the grips, stood up and applauded him. They were all emotional. Artemus Gordon's espionage drew on his musical background, which was more than simply an interesting element. During a jailbreak in Night of the Fugitives, 1966, he tapped out signals to James West using a Morse code transmitter that he concealed inside a harp. Martin would play Bach on his violin during breaks to calm himself down after tough action scenes, off-screen. In a twist of fate, producers nearly passed on casting him for the part because they felt his classical background made him too sophisticated for a Western. Improvising a scene in which Gordon plays a violin to divert attention away from a bar full of outlaws was his way of proving them incorrect. He was cast for the role according to it. Then tragedy befell in 1968. Martin had a near-fatal heart attack on August 17th and fell while filming Night of the Atini Death. A 95% blockage was discovered in his left coronary artery by the doctors. The program had to do without his co-star when he was sent to Cedars-Sinai Hospital. His performance was unaffected by anything. For a sitcom that was sometimes panned for being too campy, he managed to get an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Lead Actor in 1969. Unfortunately, on March 12, 1969, his breakthrough show, The Wild Wild West, was suddenly canceled. The plug was pulled by CBS. The show had good ratings. It peaked at #12 on the Nielsen charts, but the network caved due to political pressure. The assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. prompted Congress to begin regulating violent content on television. Despite CBS's continued airing of the similarly violent detective drama Mannix, The Wild Wild West became an easy target. Ross Martin had just reached the pinnacle of his profession when disaster struck. He had a heart attack that was almost deadly in 1968 while filming Season 4 of Wild Wild West. After getting well, he came back to finish the series, but by then, Hollywood had changed its opinion of him. Major networks withdrew their support when industry insurers deemed him a high risk. Following the 1969 cancellation of the program by CBS, because to growing concerns over TV violence, Martin had difficulty securing prominent parts. Banyan, a detective series that may have revitalized his career, offered him the main role in 1970. However, producers reconsidered after reading his medical records and cast Robert Forster, a younger actor who did not have any health issues. Harry Gold, Martin's agent, disclosed in an interview with TV Guide from 1975 that studio officials were forthright about their decision. "We can't gamble on a star who might drop dead mid-season." The difficulties extended even to guest appearances. In 1971, filmmakers requested a $250,000 insurance bond from Martin, who portrayed art critic Dale Kingston in the frame-worthy film Columbo, in the event that his health caused any delays in production. Martin ended up footing the bill as the studio declined to fund it. Although he was nominated for an Emmy for the part, his pay had plummeted. In 1973, he was making just $3,000 for a single guest appearance, down from $115,000 per episode when he was at his pinnacle on The Wild Wild West. Even with live-action parts, he continued to have problems. His 1972 role as Dr. Paul Williams in Cab 2020 was cast by Hanna-Barbera. Martin was removed after the studio's insurance stepped in after only 2 episodes. As he would later quip, "I'm the only actor fired for having a heartbeat." He persevered through all of these obstacles and kept working. He booked 87 guest parts from 1970 to 1981. The roles of villains, eccentric geniuses, and enigmatic masterminds were cast by him in plenty. Though Hollywood was hesitant to cast him in a leading role, no one could deny his undeniable skill. His cameos in Love, American Style, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and Hawaii Five-0 proved he could still rule the screen. It had always been obvious that he could assume the persona of any character. The Four of Us Are Dying, from 1960's The Twilight Zone, featured him as a con artist with the ability to change his appearance whenever he wanted. None of the 4 dialects that Martin created for the part, a Brooklyn mobster, a Southern gentleman, and another, were in the script, although director John Brahms subsequently confessed as much. Playing the haughty art critic Dale Kingston, who kills his uncle and frames his aunt, in 1971's Suitable for Framing, an episode of Columbo, was one of his most iconic performances. To bring Elmire Dory to life, a real-life art forger, Martin examined his work. At one point during production, Peter Falk, who played Columbo, really broke character and said, "I hate this guy." The episode reached its peak with a 27.3 Nielsen rating, making it the most popular Columbo episode of the first season. It ended with Kingston being captured by art books coated with fingerprints. He was talented in comedic parts as well as dramatic ones. Professor Patrick Hudson, the character he played in the 1966 episode The Do-It-Yourself Dreadful Affair of the Man from U.N.C.L.E., is an inventor who develops a device to transform water into explosives. He improvised much of the scientific vocabulary for the part by referring to his old law school texts for physics words, rather than memorizing lines. After the fact, director Joseph Sargent remarked that Ross sounded as though he had constructed a nuclear reactor in his own garage. Just as dramatic as Ross Martin's on-screen personas were his off-screen lives. The guy behind the characters was molded by his own experiences of love and sorrow, and each relationship had an impact on him. While attending night classes at George Washington University to become a lawyer, he wed Muriel Weiss in a modest New York City wedding on June 17, 1941. Phyllis Rosenblatt, who was born to them in 1943, went on to become a prominent New York artist. Their marriage was already in trouble when Martin began taking on radio assignments and Broadway rehearsals at the outset of his career. They divorced not long after they split in the late 1950s. Martin continued to show his undying love for Muriel even after they broke up. He discreetly covered the costs of her breast cancer treatment after her diagnosis in 1962. The illness persisted unabated. At the age of 47, Muriel died on March 15, 1965, while Martin was filming the pilot episode of Wild Wild West. His request for time off to attend the burial was denied by CBS management, who were concerned about potential production delays. Martin paid them little mind. He went to New York overnight, said his goodbyes, and returned to set the next morning under the influence of alcohol. He eventually gave $250,000 to cancer research in her memory after admitting, "I never forgave myself for not being there when she needed me most." The guilt lingered with him for years. When Martin remarried in 1967, the truth about Muriel's dying became public knowledge after years of relative silence. When her father decided to move on, 24-year-old Phyllis found it difficult to accept. "He loved us," she elaborated later, "but Hollywood became his true family." In a small wedding held in Beverly Hills on September 10, 1967, Martin wed Olavi Lucille Parsons. She had 2 children from a prior marriage, George, born in 1957, and Rebecca, born in 1955, and was a documentary filmmaker and model before that. Martin took all the necessary steps to formally adopt them, including updating their birth certificates to reflect his paternity. For Martin, it was a means to formalize their tie, even though others thought it was strange. Soon after they were married, Rebecca observed, "He didn't just give us his name, he gave us his heart." This was the first of many difficulties experienced by their union. While filming Season 4 of The Wild Wild West in August 1968, Martin had a heart attack that almost killed him. Olavi took it upon herself to be his constant companion, seeing to it that he took his medication as prescribed, sneaking oxygen tanks into set when necessary, and even mediating a reduction in his workload with CBS. So long as he remained employed, she was willing to take a 30% wage reduction. All that pressure was really taxing. Martin chose not to discuss her 1969 miscarriage in public, but she had one nonetheless. They were a solid family unit through it all. George, who was adopted by Martin, followed in his footsteps and became an actor, securing a role in the 1978 television movie The New Maverick with the help of his father. As a result of Olavi's encouragement, Martin gave directing a go. 2 episodes of Love, American Style, were directed by him between 1971 and 1973, at her request. Until the very end, they were there for each other, supporting each other through thick and thin. The job that catapulted Ross Martin to fame was nearly enough to make him walk away. He declined CBS's 4-time offer to play Artemus Gordon in 1963's The Wild Wild West. He was not in the mood for the monotony of weekly television after finishing The Great Race. Even more so, he feared being stereotyped. The Juilliard-educated Martin could speak 8 languages and viewed television as a creative snare. He sought out challenging parts rather than financially rewarding ones. CBS was adamant on getting Robert Conrad, so they offered him $5,000 each episode, double his salary, and creative control over his disguises. The actor couldn't refuse. For 6 months, they held off on releasing the pilot as well, in the hopes that he might alter his mind. One more thing he wanted out of Artemis Gordon before he agreed: she would never punch him. Martin firmly said, "He's a con man, not a brawler," compelling the authors to go beyond the box. Artemis avoided physical confrontations in favor of cunning, disguises, and technology, such as the sleeping gas cigar from Night of the Inferno, 1965. Taking that chance paid off. After the September 17, 1965, premiere of The Wild Wild West, Martin received 3 times as much fan mail than Conrad did in the weeks following. He still can't believe he was on the verge of discarding it all, even after all these years. "I almost destroyed my own career," he said in 1978. "Thank God Blake Edwards called me a fool and changed my mind." Martin's goal of starring in feature films was almost dashed after he landed a role that wasn't quite right. In the 1962 film Experiment in Terror, Blake Edwards portrayed the role of Red Lynch, an asthmatic murderer. Columbia Pictures refrained from using his name in the teasers and marketing despite the horrific performance. They were worried that people wouldn't buy into the murderous persona of Mr. Lucky. The intention was to heighten the film's tension, but it had the opposite effect. Even though Lynch's creepy presence was much lauded by critics, viewers were perplexed since they could hear Martin's voice for 70% of the picture, yet his name was completely absent. Casting directors even went so far as to write him off for serious parts because they thought he was more suited to comedic roles. Because of this, Lawrence Harvey was cast instead of him in The Manchurian Candidate. The harm had already been done, but the picture would subsequently become a cult masterpiece. The film opportunities Martin had been turning down had dried up by 1965, forcing the actor to return to television with all his skill. The struggle that Martin faced was not with Hollywood, but with his own emotions. He lost consciousness while playing tennis on July 3, 1981, at Corona, California's San Vicente Tennis Ranch. The conclusion was harsh. To show the world how strong he was, he had taken up the sport. Following a rigorous program of exercise and medicine, he underwent quadruple bypass surgery in 1975 after surviving a near-fatal heart attack in 1968, but it was still insufficient. He reportedly felt lightheaded mid-game, stumbled toward the clubhouse, and then fainted within feet of the entryway, according to eyewitnesses. His heart had stopped beating when paramedics got there, which took 8 minutes. A firefighter named Art Bale reported that his wife, Olavi, was screaming, "Don't let him die!" Despite administering 2 shocks, both attempts were unsuccessful. He had already departed by the time they arrived at Pomerado Hospital in Poway. At 3:17 p.m., the official time of death was recorded. The reason for this was a total occlusion of the left anterior descending artery, which is commonly known as the widowmaker. His doctor later confessed, "We cleared him for light exercise, but his determination outpaced his physiology." Olavi, who had been by his side since 1967, helping him through his first heart attack and even sneaking oxygen tanks onto Wild Wild West sets, was barely 20 feet away when he collapsed. As the paramedics applied chest compressions, she prayed the Lord's Prayer. She insisted he was only resting when she stayed by his side for 6 hours after they got to the hospital. Subsequently, she settled out of court after suing the San Vicente Tennis Ranch for $1.2 million, arguing that the emergency response was too sluggish. Martin had previously shot a situation quite similar to this one in Night of the Janus, 1968, in which Artemis Gordon pretended to have a heart attack in order to trick the villains. Olavi went on to say, "The memory haunted her life. It imitated art in the worst way." Los Angeles's Mount Si Memorial Park was the site of his burial on July 7, 1981. The funeral had almost 300 people, but the rabbi only said the Kaddish. No one spoke or offered elaborate eulogies. Shocked, Robert Conrad was present. "Ross deserved a send-off as grand as the Great Race," Blake Edwards added afterwards, but Ross just wasn't into that kind of thing. Aside from Variety and The Hollywood Reporter, No other Hollywood publication published appropriate obituaries. No one from CBS, the network that had previously paid him more than the main star, was dispatched. After canceling his program due to its excessive violence, they turned a blind eye to the guy who had created it, leaving Conrad enraged. To rub salt in the wound, his death certificate identified him as actor, retired, despite the fact that he had shot an episode of Love Boat only 3 months before to his passing. Yet, admirers kept in mind. The tradition of visiting his cemetery at Mount Si on his birthday continues to this day, with little violins left as a memorial to his most famous part. Leonard Maltin said it best when he said, "Ross Martin didn't just die, Hollywood lost a piece of its soul that day."